The tap on the glass was so soft I thought it was a branch. A pine needle scraping against the pane in the wind that always kicked up after midnight. I was used to the sounds of the Whispering Pines RV park, the hum of my neighbor's ancient air conditioner, the distant rumble of a semi on the highway, the mournful hoot of an owl that lived in the woods bordering my patch of gravel. I had cataloged them all in the 6 months I'd been hiding out here, trying to write a book that refused to be written. Loneliness had a very specific and very boring soundtrack. Tap, tap, tap. This was different. It was deliberate, rhythmic. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard of my laptop. The blue light from the screen was the only illumination in my small travel trailer, casting long, dancing shadows. My heart gave a stupid, frantic little thump against my ribs. It was 2 a.m. No one ever came to my door. No one ever had a reason to. I pushed my chair back, the wheels groaning on the cheap linoleum floor. I crept to the window beside the door, my bare feet cold. Peeking through a gap in the blinds, I saw him. Cole, the man from the vintage Airstream in the slot next to mine. In the pale glow of the park's security light, he looked like something carved from shadow and moonlight. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the darkness. He was just standing there on my flimsy metal steps, waiting. I'd watched him for months. It was my primary form of procrastination. I watched him polish the gleaming silver of his trailer until it shone like a chrome bullet. I watched him chop wood with an unnerving, economical precision, the muscles in his back and arms moving with a fluid power that made my breath catch. I watched him sit on his own steps at dusk, nursing a single beer, his gaze lost on the horizon. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen words in half a year. A nod. A quiet morning, a looks like rain. He was a closed book, a mystery I had no right to solve, and my fascination with him was a secret, shameful thing I kept tucked away like a forbidden novel. And he was on my doorstep at 2 a.m. My mind raced through 1,000 ridiculous scenarios. He was a serial killer. He was a sleepwalker. He'd run out of sugar, though who asked for sugar at this hour? I pulled the blind back another millimeter. He wasn't moving. He was just there, patient, solid. Taking a breath that felt thin and useless, I unlocked the door. I didn't open it all the way, just a few inches, keeping the chain lock engaged. My voice, when it came out, was a rusty croak. Hello. He didn't seem startled. He just turned his head, and his eyes found mine in the sliver of space. In the dim light, they looked dark, unreadable. Leo, he said. His voice was always like this, a low, gravelly thing that seemed to vibrate in the air, like stones rolling over each other at the bottom of a river. Cole, is everything okay? He was quiet for a long moment. I could smell the night on him, damp earth, pine, and the faint, clean scent of rain that had passed through hours ago. No, he said, and the single word was so devoid of panic, so calm, that it was more unsettling than a shout. No, not really. What is it? What's wrong? My hand tightened on the edge of the door. He finally looked away from me, down at his feet, then back up. There was a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. I need to come in. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a strange, quiet urgency. Why? What happened? Can't explain out here. He took a small step back, as if to show he wasn't a threat, but the intensity in his gaze held me pinned. Please. That was the word that did it. Please. It sounded foreign in that deep voice of his. It sounded vulnerable. Against every instinct that screamed at me to lock the door and hide under my bed, I slid the chain free. The metallic rattle was deafening in the silence. I opened the door. He stepped inside, and my tiny trailer immediately felt crowded, shrunk by his presence. He filled the space, all broad shoulders and long limbs. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and worn jeans, and he was barefoot. His feet were dusty on my floor. He brought the scent of the night in with him, overwhelming the stale air of my trailer, the smell of old coffee and paper. He closed the door behind him and, to my alarm, flipped the deadbolt. The solid thunk echoed in the small space. My heart was a hummingbird in my chest now. Cole, you're scaring me. He turned to face me, and for the first time, I could see his face clearly in the laptop's glow. His expression was taut, his jaw tight. His dark hair was a mess, like he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that held me. They were wide, focused, and utterly terrified. The stoic, unreadable man I watched from my window was gone. In his place was someone who looked like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice dropping even lower, almost a whisper. "I didn't know where else to go. What's going on? Are you in trouble?" He shook his head, a quick, jerky motion. He ran a hand over his face, and I saw that it was trembling. Just a bad one. A really bad one. A bad what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Nightmare," he breathed. The words seemed to cost him something. He wouldn't look at me now. He was staring at the floor, at his dusty feet, anywhere but at my face. It felt real. I woke up and the walls were closing in. I couldn't breathe in there. I stood there dumbfounded. This mountain of a man, this quiet, capable figure who seemed so completely self-contained, was hiding in my trailer because of a bad dream. The absurdity of it warred with the genuine fear radiating from him. I could feel it, a palpable thing in the air between us. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay, it's okay. You're safe here." The words felt clumsy and inadequate. What was the protocol for this? Did I offer him tea? A blanket? He finally lifted his head, and his eyes met mine again. The terror was still there, but there was something else, too. A raw, desperate plea. "Can I?" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "This is going to sound crazy. Crazier than breaking into your neighbor's trailer at 2 in the morning." I tried for a joke, but my voice trembled. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, crazier." He took a step closer, and I instinctively took a step back, my legs bumping into the small dinette table. He stopped. "I don't want to be alone," he whispered. "I can't be. Not right now. Can I just stay? For a little while? I can sit on the floor. I won't bother you." My brain struggled to catch up. He wanted to stay? Here, in my 24-foot box on wheels. I thought of my unmade bed, the pile of laundry in the corner, the general state of disarray that was a perfect reflection of my life. And then I looked at his face, at the stark fear etched into the lines around his eyes, and none of that mattered. "You don't have to sit on the floor," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my own voice. I gestured vaguely toward the small sofa that doubled as my guest bed, though I'd never had a guest. "You can sit there." He nodded, a gesture of profound gratitude. He moved to the sofa and sat down, but he looked deeply uncomfortable, perched on the edge of the cushion as if he might bolt at any second. He wrapped his arms around himself, his large frame looking cramped and out of place against my floral-patterned upholstery. An awkward silence descended. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beat of my own heart. I didn't know what to do. I stood by the table, feeling like an intruder in my own home. He was staring at the floor again, his breathing audible, a little too quick. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked quietly. "The dream?" He shook his head fiercely. "No, I don't ever want to think about it again." He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "I just need to ground myself. Know where I am." Ground himself. The phrase snagged in my mind. He looked unmoored, adrift in the aftermath of some private horror. I thought about what grounded me. The weight of my laptop. The solid feel of a book in my hands. The warmth of a coffee mug. Small, tangible things. He was still trembling slightly, a shudder that ran through his whole body. Without thinking, I moved to the small closet and pulled out the heavy quilt my grandmother had made me years ago. It was a patchwork of old flannels, soft and worn. I walked over to him and draped it over his shoulders. He flinched at my touch, a sharp, involuntary movement. But he didn't pull away. He let the quilt settle around him. His hands came up and gripped the edges of it like a lifeline. He pulled it tighter, hunching his shoulders, making himself smaller. "Thanks," he mumbled into the fabric. "It's okay," I said again, the words still feeling hollow. I retreated to my desk chair, putting a few feet of space between us. I watched him. The hard lines of his jaw were slowly beginning to soften. His breathing was evening out, deepening. He had his eyes closed, and in the dim light, he looked younger, less formidable. He just looked lost. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, in complete silence. Me in my chair, him on my sofa, wrapped in my grandmother's quilt. The digital clock on my microwave ticked over to 2:37 a.m., and I should have been terrified. A strange man was locked in my trailer. But I wasn't. All I felt was a strange, protective ache in my chest, a feeling I hadn't known I was capable of. His breathing eventually settled into a deep, slow rhythm. I thought he might have fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice muffled by the quilt. What were you doing? What? You were awake. The light was on. He shifted, turning his head slightly to look at me. Writing. I nodded, even though he could barely see me. Trying to. It's not going well. What's it about? The question was so normal, so mundane, it was jarring. I hesitated. I never talked about my book. It felt like talking about a phantom limb. It's a novel. About a man who runs away from his life and tries to start over in a small town. A low sound, half chuckle, half sigh, came from him. Sounds familiar. My cheeks grew warm. He saw me. He actually saw me. I had assumed I was invisible, just another transient resident of Whispering Pines. Yeah, well, write what you know, I guess. He was quiet for another minute. You're always writing, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just an observation. I see your light on late. Every night. So he'd been watching me, too. The thought sent a jolt through me, a strange mix of apprehension and a dizzying, stupid flutter of excitement. Our secret observations were mutual. We were two islands, it seemed, staring at each other across a narrow strait of gravel and grass. It's how I pay the bills, I said, trying to sound casual. Freelance work. The novel is the dream. The dream, he repeated softly. He unwrapped one hand from the quilt and scrubbed it over his face again. He looked exhausted. The fear had receded from his eyes, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary sadness. Dreams can be tricky things. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. The silence returned, but it was different this time. Less awkward, more companionable. The air in the trailer had changed. It was charged with his presence, with this strange, shared vulnerability. After a while, his head started to nod. His grip on the quilt loosened. He was fighting sleep, but it was a losing battle. He slumped further into the cushions, his body finally giving in to its exhaustion. His head lolled to the side, resting against the back of the sofa. His mouth was slightly parted, his breathing deep and even. He was asleep. I sat there for a long time, just watching him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, watching the way the faint light traced the line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. The fear was gone from his face, replaced by a profound peace. In sleep, he looked unguarded, approachable. The mystery was still there, but it was softer around the edges. I knew I should go to bed. My own bed was just a few feet away, in the small, curtained-off alcove at the back of the trailer. But I couldn't bring myself to move. It felt important to stand watch, to make sure the nightmares stayed away. So I stayed in my chair, the blue light of my blank document illuminating the sleeping man on my sofa, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel quite so alone. The soundtrack of my life had a new sound in it, the soft, steady breathing of the man from the Airstream next door. And it was the most comforting sound I had ever heard. The next morning, I woke up with a crick in my neck, slumped over in my desk chair. Sunlight, sharp and white, was streaming through the window, making me squint. For a confusing second, I didn't know what had happened. Then the memory of the night rushed back in. Cole, the knock, the nightmare. I sat up straight, my spine protesting. I looked at the sofa. It was empty. The quilt was folded neatly at one end, a perfect square. There was an indentation on the cushion where he had been sitting, but otherwise, it was as if he'd never been there. I listened. The trailer was silent except for the familiar hum of the fridge. I got up and checked the door. The deadbolt was unlocked. He was gone. A strange wave of disappointment washed over me, so potent it felt like a physical ache. He'd left without a word. It felt anticlimactic. I had expected something. A note. A knock on the door to say thank you. Anything other than this silent disappearance. It made the whole night feel unreal, like a fragment of a dream I'd had myself. I made coffee, my movements sluggish and automatic. I kept glancing at the sofa, at the neatly folded quilt. Had I imagined it all? But the indentation was still there, and the air still held a faint, lingering scent of him. That mix of pine and clean night air. It was a ghost in my trailer. I spent the morning trying to work, but the words wouldn't come. My focus was shot. My gaze kept drifting to the window that faced his Airstream. I could see it gleaming in the sun, impassive and silent. There was no sign of him, no movement. His truck was gone. He'd left the park. Maybe he'd left for good. Maybe he was so embarrassed by his moment of vulnerability that he couldn't face me. The thought made my stomach clench. The day dragged on. I ate lunch. I tried to read. I paced the length of my trailer, all 12 steps from end to end, until I felt like a caged animal. Every time I heard a car door or a voice outside, my head would snap up. But it was never him. It was Mr. Henderson from Slot 12 walking his yapping poodle. It was Carol, the park manager, making her rounds on her golf cart, her face a perpetual mask of sour disapproval. By late afternoon, I had convinced myself he was gone for good. The strange, intense connection of the previous night had been a fluke, an anomaly. He had needed a port in a storm, and I had been the closest, most convenient option. Now the storm had passed, and he had sailed on. It was back to normal, back to my lonely routine. The thought was more depressing than it should have been. I was staring blankly at my screen, at the same sentence I'd been trying to rewrite for 3 hours, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up. It was his truck, a dusty old Ford, pulling into the slot next to mine. My heart gave a ridiculous leap. He was back. I watched, trying to be subtle, as he got out of the truck. He moved with that same easy grace I'd admired from a distance. He was wearing a clean t-shirt now, and his hair was damp, like he'd just showered. He didn't look at my trailer. He went about his business, unloading a few bags of groceries from the passenger seat. He seemed completely normal. The terrified man from last night was gone, replaced once again by the stoic, self-contained stranger. I should have left it alone. I should have let him have his space, let him pretend it never happened if that's what he needed. But I couldn't. I needed to know. I needed some kind of acknowledgement that last night was real. I opened my door and stepped outside, blinking in the bright afternoon sun. The air was warm, smelling of sun-baked pine needles and dust. He was just closing the door to his airstream when he heard my door click shut. He turned. His body went still. For a moment, we just stood there, 20 feet of gravel between us. His face was unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was annoyed, embarrassed, or just surprised. I felt my courage wavering. This was a mistake. "Hey," I finally managed to say, my voice sounding thin. He gave a slow nod. "Hey, I saw you were back," I said, wincing at how lame it sounded. He didn't say anything. He just watched me, his gaze steady. It was the same look he gave me when we passed each other in the mornings, polite but distant. It was like he had erected a wall between us, brick by careful brick. "Look," I said, taking a step forward, then stopping. "About last night. Are you okay?" He finally broke eye contact, looking down at the ground. He kicked at a loose piece of gravel with the toe of his boot. "Yeah, I'm fine." "Okay, good." The word hung in the air, useless. The silence stretched, becoming awkward and heavy. I felt like an idiot. I should have just stayed inside. He looked up again, and his expression had softened almost imperceptibly. The wall was still there, but maybe there was a crack in it. "I'm sorry about that," he said, his voice low. "For waking you up. Barging in like that." "Don't be sorry," I said quickly. "It was no problem. Really. It was out of line." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I haven't had one that bad in years." So it was a recurring thing. The thought was a little hook in my mind. This wasn't a one-off event. This was something he lived with. Another piece of the puzzle that was Cole. "Well," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Anytime. If it, happens again." The doors open. The words were out before I could stop them. My face flushed. It was too forward. Too intimate. He looked at me then. A long, searching look. He was trying to read me, to figure out my angle. I did my best to keep my expression neutral, to not betray the frantic hope that was thrumming inside me. "Please don't shut me out." Finally, a small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from him up close. It changed his whole face, softening the hard lines, making his dark eyes crinkle at the corners. It was devastating. "Thanks, Leo," he said. And the way he said my name, with that low, rumbling voice, sent a shiver down my spine. "I appreciate that." He turned and went inside his airstream, closing the door softly behind him. I stood there for another minute, the afternoon sun warm on my face. The wall was still there, but he had opened a window, just a little one, and it was enough. The days that followed fell into a new kind of rhythm. The dynamic between us had shifted, subtly but undeniably. The polite, distant nods were replaced by actual greetings. He'd call out a morning, Leo, as he headed to his truck, and I'd offer a "Hey, Cole" from my doorway, coffee mug in hand. They were small exchanges, meaningless to anyone else. But to me, they felt like monumental progress. I still watched him. I couldn't help it. But now, it felt less like spying and more like observing a friend. A very quiet, very handsome friend. I learned his routines. He was a handyman of some sort. He left early in the morning in his truck, which was filled with tools and lumber, and came back in the late afternoon, usually covered in a fine layer of sawdust. He smelled of fresh-cut wood and sweat, a combination I found embarrassingly appealing. One afternoon, I was struggling with the awning on my trailer. It was an old, crank-operated thing, and the mechanism had jammed. I was wrestling with it, cursing under my breath, my face red with exertion, when his shadow fell over me. "Need a hand with that." I jumped, startled. I hadn't even heard him approach. He was standing right behind me, his arms crossed over his chest. He had a small, amused smile on his face. "It stuck," I grumbled, feeling my cheeks heat up. I hated feeling incompetent, especially in front of him. He made everything look so effortless. He stepped forward, and I moved out of the way. "Let me see." He took the crank from my hand, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The contact was electric, a tiny spark of warmth that shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. He didn't seem to notice. He examined the mechanism with a practiced eye, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Yeah, the gear's stripped. Common problem with these older models." He gave the crank a firm, steady turn, using his strength to force it past the sticking point. The awning groaned in protest, then slowly, miraculously, began to retract. He worked the crank until the awning was safely tucked away against the side of the trailer. He handed the crank back to me. "You'll want to get that replaced. It's only going to get worse." "Right. Thanks." I was staring at his hands. They were large, calloused, with a few small, faded scars on the knuckles. They were capable hands. The kind of hands that could fix things. The kind of hands that had gripped my grandmother's quilt like a lifeline. "No problem." He was about to turn away, but then he hesitated. He looked from the awning back to my face. "I could take a look at it for you, if you want. This weekend. I probably have a spare gear in the truck." The offer caught me off guard. "Oh, you don't have to do that. It's a 10-minute job," he said with a shrug. "Easier than listening to you swear at it all afternoon." The corner of his mouth twitched again. He was teasing me. The realization sent another pleasant jolt through me. "Okay," I said, a slow smile spreading across my own face. "Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Cole. Saturday morning work for you." "Perfect." He gave me a final nod and headed back to his Airstream. I stood there, holding the useless crank, my heart beating a little faster than it should. It was just an awning, a neighborly gesture, but it felt like more. It felt like an invitation. Another brick being carefully removed from the wall between us. That Saturday, he was at my door at 9 o'clock sharp, a toolbox in one hand. I had been up since 7, cleaning my trailer obsessively, as if he were coming for a formal inspection. I had even put on a clean shirt. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice a little too bright. "Already had some. Thanks." He got right to work. I stood nearby, trying not to hover, feeling useless. I watched him work, fascinated by the quiet competence of his movements. He laid out his tools on a clean rag on the ground, each one in its place. He took the old mechanism apart with a few deft turns of a wrench, his hands sure and steady. "So you're a handyman?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Something like that," he said, not looking up from his work. He was focused, his attention entirely on the task at hand. "I fix things. Whatever people need. You're good at it." He glanced up at me then, a quick, fleeting look. "It's easier than fixing people." The comment was unexpected, and it landed with a quiet weight. There was a story there, a deep one, but I knew better than to push. I just nodded. "I guess it is." He finished the repair in less than 15 minutes, just as he'd said. He tested the awning, cranking it in and out smoothly. It worked perfectly. "There you go," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good as new." "Wow. Thank you. Seriously. I owe you." "Don't worry about it." He started packing up his tools. "No, I insist," I said. "Let me at least buy you lunch. Or dinner." The invitation was impulsive, a leap of faith. He paused, his back to me. For a long second, I was sure he was going to say no, that I had pushed too far, too fast. But then he turned around, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I'm cooking steaks tonight," he said. Got an extra one. You could come over. If you want. My brain short-circuited. He was inviting me over. To his trailer. For dinner. Yeah. I said, trying to keep the giddy excitement out of my voice. Yeah, I'd like that a lot. 7 o'clock. 7 is great. He nodded, then picked up his toolbox and walked away. I watched him go, a slow, stupid grin spreading across my face. I was having dinner with Cole. The mysterious man from the Airstream was no longer just a subject of my quiet observation. He was becoming something more, and I was both thrilled and terrified to find out what that was. I spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous agitation. I tried to write, but my mind was a blank slate, filled only with thoughts of Cole. What should I wear? What should I bring? Was this a date? No, of course not. It was just a neighborly dinner. A thank you for fixing an awning. But my traitorous heart didn't seem to care about the distinction. It hammered away in my chest like it was trying to escape. At 6:45, I grabbed a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Though what special occasion I had been anticipating in this self-imposed exile, I had no idea, and walked the 20 feet to his trailer. My palms were sweating. I knocked on the polished aluminum door. It opened a moment later. He was standing there, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. He was wearing a dark blue Henley that stretched across his chest, and the sleeves were pushed up to his elbows, revealing strong, tanned forearms. He had a faint smile on his face. Hey, he said, come on in. I stepped inside, and my first thought was how different his space was from mine. Where my trailer was cluttered with books and papers, a chaotic mess of my scattered thoughts, his was a marvel of neatness and order. Everything had a place. The small kitchen counter was clear except for a cutting board and a knife. The wood-paneled walls were bare except for a single, framed photograph of a rugged, windswept coastline. It was a calm, quiet, masculine space. It was him. This is nice, I said, meaning it. It's small, but it's home, he replied, taking the wine from me. Thanks. I'll open this. The smell in the air was incredible. Sizzling steak, garlic, and something else, rosemary maybe. My stomach rumbled. He worked at the counter, uncorking the wine with an easy efficiency. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the floor, not sure where to put myself. Have a seat, he said, gesturing with his head toward the small dinette booth, which was identical to mine but upholstered in a simple, dark gray fabric. I slid into the booth. He poured 2 glasses of wine and set one in front of me before returning to the small stove. I watched him move around the tiny kitchen. He was comfortable here at ease. He seared the steaks in a cast-iron skillet, the sound a satisfying hiss. So, how's the book coming? He asked, his back to me. It's coming, I lied. Slowly. What's the man who runs away from his life running from? The question was casual, but it felt pointed. I took a sip of wine. A bad breakup. A dead-end job. A feeling of being trapped. The usual. And what's he looking for in the small town? I don't think he knows, I said, the words tasting more honest than I'd intended. Maybe just a quiet place to figure things out. Cole flipped the steaks, the motion economical and precise. Sometimes quiet is good. He plated the food, perfectly cooked steaks, roasted potatoes, and green beans, and brought the plates to the table. He sat down across from me. In the close confines of the booth, our knees were almost touching. I could feel the heat radiating from him. The space felt charged, intimate. This looks amazing, I said, and it did. Hope you like it rare. I do. We ate in a comfortable silence for a few minutes. The steak was incredible, better than any I'd had in a restaurant. He was a good cook, of course. It seemed like he was good at everything he did. So, I said, deciding to take a chance. What about you? What are you running from? He stopped chewing. He put his fork down and looked at me, his expression unreadable again. I thought I had crossed a line. I'm sorry, I said quickly. That's none of my business. No, it's okay. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid. He stared into it like he was looking for an answer. I'm not running from something, he said finally, his voice quiet. I'm running to something. What's that? He looked up from his glass, and his eyes met mine. They were dark and serious. Peace. The word hung in the air between us. It was so simple, and yet it felt like he had just handed me a profound secret. This quiet, nomadic life wasn't an escape for him. It was a destination. Did you find it? I asked softly. A small, sad smile touched his lips. I'm getting closer. We finished our meal, the conversation turning to lighter things. We talked about the RV park, about the terrible coffee at the camp store, about Carol the park manager and her reign of terror. He had a dry, understated sense of humor that took me by surprise. I found myself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that felt rusty from disuse. He told me about some of the jobs he'd had, the places he'd lived. He'd worked on a fishing boat in Alaska, a ranch in Montana, a construction crew in Arizona. He was a wanderer. He collected places the way I collected books. As he talked, I found myself studying the little things about him. The way he gestured with his hands when he was telling a story, the deep timbre of his voice, the way his eyes would light up when he talked about the mountains in Montana. I was gathering details, hoarding them like treasures. After dinner, we sat with our wine as the sun went down. The light inside the Airstream grew soft and golden. The small space felt cozy, safe, a bubble of warmth and light in the growing darkness. I should probably go, I said, though I didn't want to. I could have sat there all night. You don't have to, the words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a shout. I looked at him. He was watching me with that same intense, searching gaze from the other afternoon. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. The space between us, the few feet of the table, suddenly felt like a vast, charged canyon. My heart started to beat that familiar, frantic rhythm. This is it. The thought is clear and terrifying. This is the moment where something changes. He leans forward slightly, his hand resting on the table, just inches from mine. His eyes are locked on my face, and I feel like he can see everything. All my loneliness, all my quiet, desperate yearning. I feel completely exposed. Leo, he says, and my name is a rough, soft sound in the quiet trailer. I can't speak. I can only look at him, my breath caught in my throat. He doesn't say anything else. He doesn't have to. He just closes the small distance between us, his fingers brushing against mine on the tabletop. It's not an accident. It's a deliberate, questioning touch. A single point of contact that sends a cascade of fire through my veins. I don't pull away. I turn my hand over, my palm facing up. An offering. An answer. His fingers slowly, tentatively, lace with mine. His hand is warm and rough, his grip gentle but firm. It feels right. In a way nothing has felt right for a very, very long time. We just sit there, our hands clasped on the table, the silence stretching out, filled with the sound of our breathing. He doesn't smile. His expression is serious, almost solemn. He's watching my face, gauging my reaction. I meet his gaze, trying to pour all the things I can't say into my eyes. The relief, the hope, the terrifying, overwhelming feeling that this is the beginning of something I am not remotely prepared for. And in the soft, golden light of his trailer, holding the hand of the man who was a stranger just weeks ago, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't realized I'd been searching for my whole life. It felt like coming home. A massive thunderstorm rolled in a week later. It wasn't a surprise. The air had been thick and heavy all day, a humid, oppressive blanket that promised violence. The sky had turned a bruised shade of purple and gray by late afternoon. I hated thunderstorms. The sudden, violent crack of thunder always sent a jolt of primal fear through me, a ridiculous and childish reaction I'd never outgrown. I was trying to work, but the encroaching storm had made me restless. The wind was picking up, rattling the frame of my trailer, making the pine trees whisper and groan. The first fat drops of rain began to splatter against my window, leaving fat, greasy streaks on the glass. Then, with a flicker and a hum, the power went out. My trailer was plunged into a disorienting darkness. The sudden silence was more jarring than the noise had been. No hum of the fridge, no glow from my laptop screen. Just the sound of the wind and the escalating tattoo of rain on the metal roof. I swore under my breath and fumbled for the emergency lantern I kept in a cupboard. My fingers closed around the cool plastic, and I switched it on. A pale, sterile LED light filled the small space, casting long, eerie shadows. I was alone in the dark, with a storm raging outside. My anxiety began to prickle at the edges of my mind. Then, there was a knock at my door. Not the soft, hesitant tap from before, but a firm, solid rap. I knew it was him. I opened the door to find Cole standing on my steps, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead and dripping from his chin. He was holding 2 beers in one hand and a powerful-looking flashlight in the other. He didn't look scared. He looked steady, a rock in the middle of the storm. "Power's out," he said, stating the obvious. The wind whipped his words away. "I noticed," I shouted back over the roar. "Figured you might not want to ride it out alone," he said. "Got beer?" My heart did a stupid, grateful flip. He had thought of me. He knew, somehow, that I wouldn't like this. Or maybe he was the one who didn't want to be alone. The memory of his nightmare, of his vulnerability, flashed in my mind. Maybe we were both just looking for a port in the storm. "Come in," I yelled, stepping back to let him pass. He came inside, bringing a gust of wind and the fresh, clean smell of rain with him. He shut the door, and the roar of the storm was immediately muffled, reduced to a drumming on the roof and walls. He set the beers and the flashlight on the counter. "Your lantern is brighter than mine," he commented, looking at the pale circle of light it cast. "One of the few things in this rust bucket that actually works," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice was shaky. A particularly loud clap of thunder rattled the trailer, and I flinched involuntarily. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He didn't say anything, but his gaze softened. He twisted the cap off one of the beers and handed it to me. Our fingers brushed. That now familiar spark. "It's just a bit of noise," he said quietly. "I know. It's stupid." I took a long swallow of the cold beer. It helped. A little. We stood in the small kitchen area, the lantern on the counter between us, casting our shadows long and distorted on the walls. The rain was coming down in sheets now, a relentless, deafening barrage. "My dad used to love storms," I said, mostly to fill the silence. "He'd make us all sit on the porch and watch the lightning. He said it was nature's fireworks." "And you didn't agree?" Cole asked, leaning against the counter, looking relaxed. "I spent most of the time hiding under a blanket." He smiled, a real, warm smile that lit up his face in the pale light. "My dad hated them. He was a farmer. Storms meant hail, and hail meant losing a whole crop. To him, it was just the sound of money flying away. It was the first time he had ever mentioned his family. Another small piece of himself, offered up in the storm-darkened intimacy of my trailer." "Where was that?" I asked. "Nebraska. A long way from here." He took a drink of his beer, his eyes distant, lost in a memory. "A lot of flat land and a whole lot of sky. You don't miss it." He was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I miss the sky. I don't miss the feeling of being stuck to one small piece of dirt." We fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence. We listened to the storm together. The drumming rain, the howl of the wind, the distant rumble of thunder. In here, with him, it felt less threatening. The trailer felt less like a fragile metal box and more like a sanctuary. A small, safe island in the middle of a raging sea. His calm was infectious. It was a steadying presence that anchored my own frayed nerves. He told me more stories that night. Not big, revealing confessions, but small anecdotes. He told me about the time he'd seen a grizzly bear in Alaska, so close he could smell its wet fur. He told me about learning to mend fences on the ranch in Montana, and how the old rancher had taught him that a good fence was about tension, about knowing how much something could take before it snapped. The parallel was not lost on me. I found myself opening up, too. I told him about my life before this, about the soul-crushing marketing job I'd quit, the cramped city apartment, the relationship that had ended not with a bang, but with a slow, fizzling silence. I told him how I'd sold most of my things, bought this old trailer, and just started driving, with no destination in mind, until I found this quiet, forgotten corner of the world. "You're braver than you think, Leo," he said, after I'd finished my story. He was looking at me, his expression serious. "Running away takes guts. But starting over? That takes real courage." No one had ever called me brave before. I didn't know how to respond. The compliment landed in my chest and bloomed, a warm, unfamiliar flower. I just took another sip of my beer and hoped the dim light hid the flush I could feel creeping up my neck. The storm raged for hours. We finished the beers and just sat, talking in low voices, the lantern casting a circle of light around us. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the sound of the rain and his voice, that low, rumbling sound that made me feel safe. At some point, the conversation wound down. We were just sitting in a comfortable, shared silence. He was on the sofa, and I was in my desk chair, which I'd pulled closer. In the pale lantern light, the lines of his face seemed softer. He looked tired, but peaceful. "You know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The nightmares, they're about being trapped. Small spaces. No way out." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the lantern, at the way the light flickered. Being in that field in Nebraska, sometimes it felt like the biggest trap of all. All that open space, and nowhere to go. It was a confession. A moment of pure, unguarded vulnerability. He was giving me the key to the locked room inside him. He was trusting me with his fear. The weight of it was immense, a precious, terrifying gift. I wanted to say something profound, something comforting, but all the words felt cheap and inadequate. So instead, I just reached out and put my hand on his arm. His muscles tensed for a second under my touch, and then relaxed. I just left my hand there, a simple, solid point of contact. A silent promise. You're not trapped here. You're not alone. He looked from the lantern to my hand on his arm, and then up to my face. His eyes were dark and deep, and in them, I saw a flicker of the same raw emotion I'd seen that first night. But it wasn't fear this time. It was something else. Something softer. Something that looked a lot like hope. He didn't pull away. He didn't say anything. He just covered my hand with his own, his large, warm hand engulfing mine. And we sat there, in the heart of the storm, connected by that simple touch, while the world raged outside our small, safe haven. The thunder still cracked, and the wind still howled, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid at all. The aftermath of the storm left the park a mess of fallen branches and muddy puddles. The power was still out the next morning. It was in this state of quiet chaos that Carol, the park manager, chose to make her rounds. I saw her golf cart coming, sloshing through the mud, and my stomach tightened. Carol operated on a fuel of suspicion and complaint. Cole and I were outside, assessing the minor damage. A few pine cones had dented my roof, and his welcome mat had blown halfway across the park. We were standing between our trailers, a comfortable distance between us, talking about the best way to secure a loose piece of trim on his Airstream. Carol pulled up, her golf cart whining to a halt. She was a small, bird-like woman with sharp eyes and hair sprayed into a rigid helmet. She looked from me to Cole, her lips pursed into a thin line of disapproval. "Morning, boys," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that didn't fool anyone. "Quite a storm we had." "It was," Cole said, his voice flat. He had a way of going completely still and impassive around her, becoming an unreadable wall of stoicism. "Power should be back on by this afternoon, they're saying," she continued, though she wasn't looking at the down power line near the entrance. She was looking at us, at the space between us. "I trust you both weathered it all right. All alone in your little trailers." The insinuation was as subtle as a sledgehammer. My face grew hot. I hated the way she looked at us, like we were a puzzle she was trying to solve, and she had already decided the answer was something sordid. "We managed," I said, my voice tight. Carol's sharp eyes flicked to my trailer door, then back to my face. "Funny thing, I was making my rounds last night, checking on folks during the outage. Saw a light on in your window, Leo. But your truck was here, Cole. And your trailer was dark as a tomb." She let the words hang in the air, a blatant accusation. My mind went blank with a mixture of anger and panic. She was accusing us. She was prying, judging, trying to catch us in some violation of her petty rules. I opened my mouth to say something, to defend, to explain, but no words came out. And then, Cole moved. It was a simple, fluid motion. He closed the distance between us and put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me against his side. The gesture was so unexpected, so bold, it shocked me into silence. His arm was heavy and warm around me. His side was solid and firm against mine. It felt protective. He looked down at Carol, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were hard as flint. "Leo's not a fan of storms," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I was keeping him company. Is that a problem, Carol?" The challenge was unmistakable. The possessive way he held me, the steel in his voice, it was a performance. A brilliant, stunning performance designed to shut her down. And it was working. Carol was taken aback. Her mouth opened and closed a few times. She looked at Cole's arm around my shoulders, at the way I was tucked against his side, and a flicker of confusion, then grudging acceptance, crossed her face. She had been looking for something illicit, something to gossip about. A public display of affection, even a fake one, was too concrete. It was a statement. No, she finally stammered. No problem at all. Just making sure everyone is all right. She revved the golf cart's electric motor, clearly eager to retreat. Well, you have a good day. She sped off, sending a spray of muddy water in her wake. Cole didn't move his arm. Not right away. We stood there, watching her go. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I was acutely aware of every point of contact between our bodies. The weight of his arm, the heat of his hand on my shoulder, the solid wall of his chest against my side. He smelled of rain and sawdust, and something that was just him. It was a performance, I told myself again. A strategic move, but it didn't feel like one. It felt real. It felt like he was claiming me, protecting me. Finally, slowly, he dropped his arm. The loss of his warmth was immediate, and I felt a pang of disappointment. The air between us suddenly felt cold. Sorry about that, he said, not looking at me. He was staring at the spot where Carol's golf cart had disappeared. She's a nosy old bird. I just wanted to get her off our backs. It's okay, I said, my voice a little breathless. Thank you. She won't bother us again about it, he said. She thinks she knows what's going on now. It's better to give people like her a simple story they can understand. A simple story. Us. Together. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had created a narrative for us, a fiction to protect us from the outside world. But the lines between that fiction and the reality of what was growing between us were becoming increasingly blurred. He finally turned to look at me. The hardness was gone from his eyes, replaced by something questioning, uncertain. He was waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if he had overstepped. It was convincing, I said, a small, shaky smile on my lips. The corner of his mouth twitched. I thought so. The air between us was thick with everything that hadn't been said. The fake intimacy had sparked a real tension. A current was flowing between us now, undeniable and strong. He had drawn a line in the sand, not just for Carol, but for us. He had shown me what it would be like to stand with him, to be shielded by him. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I wanted more of it. I wanted the performance to be real. The interaction with Carol changed everything. The comfortable, easy space we had started to build between us was suddenly charged with a new, palpable tension. The unspoken had been given a shape, a name. Every glance, every brief conversation, was now loaded with the memory of his arm around my shoulders. The fiction he had created for Carol's benefit had taken root in the space between us, and it was growing, wild and untamed. We didn't talk about it. We talked about the weather, about the book I was still not writing, about a leaky faucet in his airstream. We talked about everything and nothing. But the real conversation was happening in the silences, in the long, drawn-out looks, in the way we seemed to be constantly orbiting each other, never too close, but never far away. A few days later, I was sitting outside on my steps, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at the woods, when he came over. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down on the step below me. He was close enough that I could feel the warmth from his body, close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. "How's the quiet place?" he asked, his voice low. "What? Your book," he said. "The man looking for a quiet place. Has he found it yet?" I sighed, looking down into my coffee cup. "I think he's more lost than when he started." "Maybe he's not looking for a place," Cole said, his gaze fixed on the same trees I had been staring at. "Maybe he's looking for a person." My breath caught. I looked at him, at his strong, stoic profile against the backdrop of the green woods. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he was talking about us. This was it. The loaded interaction. The conversation where the subtext was everything. "I am looking for a person. I am looking for you." The words were on the tip of my tongue, so loud in my head I was sure he could hear them. But fear, that old, familiar companion, kept them locked behind my teeth. "Maybe," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He turned his head then, and his eyes met mine. His gaze was so intense, so direct, it felt like a physical touch. It stripped away all my defenses, all my carefully constructed walls. He was looking right into me, and I knew that he could see it all. "What are we doing, Leo?" he asked, his voice quiet but insistent. There it was. The question. The tipping point. The moment where ambiguity was no longer an option. The air crackled. The world seemed to narrow down to this small patch of gravel, to the space between two men sitting on a set of flimsy metal steps. My heart is a frantic bird, beating against the cage of my ribs. This is it. This is the precipice. I can back away, make a joke, pretend I don't understand the question. I can retreat to the safety of my loneliness. Or I can jump. I take a breath. It feels like the first one I've taken in years. I don't know, Cole, I say, and my voice is raw with an honesty that terrifies me. What do you want to be doing? A flicker of something, surprise? Relief? Crosses his face. He looks down at his hands, which are resting on his knees. Those capable, calloused hands. He turns them over, studying his own palms as if the answer is written there. I'm tired of being quiet, he says, so softly I can barely hear him. He looks up at me again, and the vulnerability is back in his eyes, the same raw need I saw the night he came to my door. I'm tired of pretending that I don't watch you through my window. I'm tired of pretending that my heart doesn't beat a little faster every time you walk out your door. Every word is a blow, a dismantling of my fear. He feels it too. This isn't one-sided. This isn't just my own secret, lonely obsession. It's real. It's mutual. I thought I was the only one. I breathe, the confession tumbling out of me, clumsy and breathless. I watch you all the time. When you chop wood, when you work on your truck. I've been falling for you for months. There. It's out. The secret is free. The world doesn't end. The sky doesn't fall. He just watches me, his expression softening into something I've never seen before. It's a look of such profound tenderness it makes my throat ache. He closes his eyes for a moment, like he's savoring the words. When he opens them again, they are shining. Leo, he says, and my name is a prayer. He stands up and turns to face me. He holds out his hand. It's not a question. It's a summons. I put my hand in his fingers close around mine, warm and strong. He pulls me gently to my feet, until I am standing in front of him, so close I can see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, so close I can feel his breath on my face. He doesn't rush. He just looks at me, his gaze tracing the features of my face as if he's memorizing them. He lifts his other hand and gently cups my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch is reverent. It undoes me. I'm done pretending, he whispers. And then he leans in and kisses me. It's not a performance. It's not for show. It's slow, and it's deep, and it's honest. It's the feeling of a long thirst being quenched. His lips are soft, firm, and they taste of coffee and mint and him. It's a kiss full of all the unspoken words, all the stolen glances, all the quiet yearning. It's the end of the silence. I kiss him back with everything I have, my hand coming up to grip his shirt. I pour all my loneliness, all my fear, all my hope into it. It's a kiss of relief, of recognition, of coming home. When we finally break apart, we're both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His hand is still on my cheek, his thumb still making slow, soothing circles. Okay, he asks, his voice rough. Okay, I breathe. It's more than okay. It's everything. In the quiet of the afternoon, standing on the steps of my rusty trailer, with the scent of pine in the air and the solid presence of him surrounding me, I finally understood what the man in my book was looking for. It wasn't a place. It was a feeling. It was this. I woke the next morning to the sound of birdsong and the feeling of being utterly, completely alone. My bed was empty. The trailer was silent. Sunlight was streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For a disoriented moment, I thought it had all been a dream. The confession, the kiss, the hours that followed, a blur of soft touches and whispered words in the dark of my small bed. But then I saw it. His gray t-shirt, the one he'd been wearing yesterday, was draped over my desk chair. The scent of him, that warm, clean, wood smoke scent, clung to my pillows. It was real. All of it was real. And he was gone. A cold, familiar dread began to seep into my chest. He had left. He had woken up in the clear light of day and regretted it. He had seen the reality of me, of my cluttered life in this tiny trailer, and he had fled. My mind, my worst enemy, started spinning scenarios, each one more painful than the last. He was embarrassed. He was confused. It was a mistake. I was a mistake. I got out of bed, my body aching in a way that was both pleasant and sad. I pulled on a pair of jeans and walked to the window, my heart pounding with a sick, anxious rhythm. I peeked through the blinds. His truck was still there, but the airstream was buttoned up tight, the door shut, the windows curtained. There was no sign of life. The silence was deafening. The morning after unease I had only ever read about in books was a physical entity, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had finally let someone in, had finally shown someone the soft, vulnerable core of me, and he had left without a word. The pain of it was sharp and immediate. I made coffee, my hands trembling slightly. I sat at my dinette table, staring at his t-shirt. It was a tangible piece of evidence, a cruel reminder of what I had, for a few short hours, thought I had found. I felt like an idiot. A naive, hopeful idiot. Men like Cole, strong and silent and self-sufficient, they didn't fall for men like me, men who lived in their heads and hid from the world. I spent an hour torturing myself. I replayed every moment from the day before, searching for a sign, a hint that I had misread everything. But all I could remember was the tenderness in his eyes, the honesty in his voice, the feeling of rightness when he had touched me. It didn't make sense. Just as I was sinking into a truly epic spiral of self-pity, there was a soft knock on my door. My head snapped up. My heart leaped into my throat. It couldn't be. I scrambled to the door, my mind a chaotic mess. I took a deep breath and opened it. He was standing there. He was holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He was wearing a fresh t-shirt, but his hair was still damp and sleep-tousled. He looked nervous. His eyes were uncertain, his mouth set in a serious line. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet.